Okay, so today I want to do a little bit more in depth of a discussion on the relationship between views, controllers, and models, and build up into what the readings have been focusing on this week on this nested forms and this accept attributes for thing. So to do that, I want to just create a project from the beginning, but this time it'll have two models with some kind of relationship. So as kind of a quick tangent here, right at the beginning, I'm noticing in the pod meetings, a bunch of people will have problems with Webpacker usually or some other feature of Rails that that we're not actually using. So I just want to draw everybody's attention to the fact that if you type in Rails new -- help, you can get a bunch of information, including information on how to skip all of these features that we don't actually use, right? So right now, at this point, our web apps are pretty simple. So we can kind of get away with saying, well, I want to create a new Rails application. My domain is going to be library books. We'll call this the library app. But you know what? I'm not going to use Action Mailer, right? I'm sure you guys have noticed the Action Mailer routes that get there by default. I'm not going to use.
Am I looking in the wrong place, or should that say Action Mailbox?
Both are there.
Okay.
So we're also not using Action Mailbox. We're not using, let's see, Action Text. We're not using that. What else? In particular, the big one to know is that we're not using the JavaScript stuff. So if you're getting any problems with Webpacker, you can work around those problems, but the easiest thing for now might be to just say, don't include that. That would totally be fine. That's a reasonable fix at this point in the curriculum. So,
question.
Yeah, sure.
What is the utility of the no skip, since the default is no skip?
A lot of these kinds of options are generated for you by some kind of internal library. So my guess is that they use some kind of gem that just generated a skip and no skip version of each option.
And can you use those libraries outside of using Rails? Because then it might make sense, right? It's a default for Rails here.
Yeah, probably. I'm not super familiar with whatever the like Ruby ecosystems version of GetOps would be, but that would be the kind of theme here, right? The standard Unixy thing we're talking about is GetOps. So most languages have some kind of built-in thing like that handles that stuff. So if you're in like a C-like language, it's probably just called GetOps. But if you're in like a Ruby language, it might be called that, but it's probably called something else. But that's where I would start the Googling if I were looking for something like that. Hopefully that was a satisfying answer. It was just a really wrong way to say that I don't know at all.
This is where you do the no test framework stuff also, right?
Oh, yes, and I should have done that. I meant to do that.
I don't see it here, which is why I didn't remind you. Was it just off the screen?
Skip test. So when you do the generator, you can do the no test framework, and that turns it off for that generator. But when you do Rails new, if you say skip tests, that turns it off globally for the whole project. But that's fine. We'll just not worry about that. So here we go. We got this project. It's a library domain. Hold on. My text editor breaks if we don't have pry. And what? And if we don't have Rubocop. So go ahead and add that in. Good. So now, let's get here, and we should be good to go. Do my auto format. Okay, so we want to start, I think, with the data layer. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to generate. So if you're looking at home, it's down here, right, where it's bundle exec Rails generate, and I'm going to run generate a model.
Are you specifically, are you not doing a resource on purpose?
Yeah. Just to go through it a little bit slower. So we're going to generate an author. An author is going to have a name, and that's going to be it. Yes, we will save that. So we're going through, and boom, that is working. Then we will generate another model, because an author is going to have a book, and a book is going to belong to an author. So books have titles. That's a string, so I don't have to specify. But they're also going to have an author ID. Sorry?
String is the default.
String is the default, yeah.
Does that mean that the word string will appear in the migration file, or that you don't need it at all?
The word string will appear in the migration file. So like I didn't specify it for the author model. Okay. Boom. But string appears right there. So just if you're specifying a string, then it's all, it's all good. You don't need anything. So we'll generate a book. A book has a title. A book has an author ID, and that author ID is going to be an integer, right? And we're setting up for a belongs to relationship. Okay, so that should be good. And then we will go ahead and run migrate so that we can get our database up and ready to go. The next step for creating our actual relationships, right, is to go into the model file. Let's start with the book model, and then we need to specify that a book belongs to an author, right? You need to do that for Active Record to finish up its metaprogramming magic. And
Author has many.
Right, and an author has many books. Rock and roll. So remember that every has many relationship has to correspond to a belongs to, right? So just that plug is going to be in there. The one column that I put in, the author ID, is needed for both of these relationships to work, right? So the belongs to has many relationship is pretty common in most of your projects, and you can get into a flow like that where you're going through those steps, right? You set up the foreign key column, you set up the belongs to relationship, you set up the has many. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and seed some data first. It's a good practice to have something to test with. I'm going to create some authors, and I'm going to use this find or create by method. And what this does is it won't duplicate things that are already there. So I'm going to specify the same kind of just name that I normally would. But the only difference is if I run this file twice, it's not going to put Ovid in there twice. It's just going to notice that Ovid's already there and then be totally fine with that, right? It's not going to duplicate any information. So our authors then need some books, right? So we'll say book.find or create by. Title is going to be the Aeneid, and the author is going to be Virgil.
You could also make Virgil an instance variable and then just reference it, right? Oh, you did that, okay.
And do, yeah. And then I could also do virgil.books.build.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question.
Yep, all of that would be fine.
Find or create, you can chain with find or create, right?
You can chain with find or create. I'm not sure. I'd have to check the documentation.
Or you could just try it, spin the wheel.
Well, what do you mean? You want to do?
I mean, can't you do virgil.books.find or create by title equals title?
Well,
I'm not sure.
Let's find out. Okay. So we want okay, so we want to create an author. Okay, and then you want to do author.books.find or create by title is title.
You're missing your close though.
Okay, so books, their book is there. Nice. Okay, and if we run that command again, well, that's going to create a new one because the title doesn't match. Nice, it does work.
Cool.
Okay. Choopadoom. I'll do it that way for Ovid stuff. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and seed the database. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
What? Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Are you missing a dot or is it lagging?
Oh, no, it's not. Okay, there we go. What a horrible job of typing I've been doing. Okay, rock and roll. So now we've got some books, we've got some stuff in there. So let's go ahead and start with our just basic CRUD stuff. I guess we'll start with that. So we're gonna need.
Does it make sense for there to be a routes generator or not? Not really.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't use it even if there was, just because the routes file is so simple. Let's do a resources books. And we might as well do a resources authors just for kicks. Okay, and then
We see only because we want to restrict it from and have it not the ones we don't need. But what is the default set? Do you know offhand?
Choom, let's find out. So it default sets index, create, new, update, destroy. So it sets all the full CRUD ones.
Okay. And what did you just to make that? Okay.
Sorry?
What did you just type to get that to show up?
Rake roots. So if I were just in a normal terminal.
Oh, sorry. It's because you already saved it. I thought you didn't save it and you had done like a help command or something to get you the list.
Oh, no.
You actually made it and then looked at it. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Okay. So from there, let's go ahead and generate a controller. We'll do a books controller. We'll start with the index, show, new, create, right? Because that's kind of really what we care about right now. So we'll go ahead and do that. This controller method generates some extra views. So if we go into the views folder, you'll notice that it created a view for every action name, but we don't actually want to create view. So we'll go ahead and just delete that.
Well, that's like a thing it should be smart enough to avoid. You never want both sides, right?
Yeah, I think it wants to err on the side of, of assuming that every action is corresponding with a view. I'm sure there was a decision that went into that. Okay, so here we are. We'll just start with all books. And we'll go to the index.html view. And we will
make an iterator.
Yep, just iterate over books.each do book. We'll put all this in a UL. Each book will become a list item. And inside of that, we will link to, we'll create a link that has an intertext that's the book title, and it points to the book path, the show page for this particular book. That's enough of that loop. And then we might as well also at the bottom have a link to new book, and that will go to the new book path. If we launch the server, we should be able to then go to localhost 3000, be it Rails, go to books, and we've got all the books. We've got this new book link. Okay, then a particular show page should be pretty straightforward, right? The show page, we will just, yeah, we'll just do the.
But we did not yet create the instance variable in the controller for this.
Right. So let's go back to the controller. And for now, well,
the before action version?
Yeah, let's do the before action version because it does a good job of.
I'm so impressed with myself every time I use it. I'm like, I'm a programmer.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one. And it does it's a great place to specify, like, to abstract the error handling logic. So you always want to handle the situation where a book's not found. So here, right, remember that find by ID or find by could always return nil. So we're going to say if it does return nil, then we're going to just go ahead and redirect to the books path. And that way, if that method's been run, I can always assume that at book is a non-nil value. And we say before action, we will always call that, but we'll only call it right now before the show page, which probably makes sense. And then if we go here, what set book?
Well, you didn't. No.
I added an S where there shouldn't have been an S. Okay, so we've got our new book. Let's show the author actually.
Book.author.name
equals book.author.name. Yeah, by Virgil. Awesome. Cool. So what we really care about right now is, well, let's show off that if I go to an invalid ID, it takes me right back. I don't have to worry about that. So I really care about this right now, right? This is going to be the interesting stuff where we can delve a little bit deeper. So at this point in the curriculum, right, you were writing a lot of HTML by hand, and the hardest part of that was the forms, writing the forms by hand. But now we're going to be using helper methods to generate HTML for us. So except for some like superficial styling and structuring, we don't really need to do much advanced HTML stuff, right? Because of things like the form for method, right? So the form for method is going to take in an object, an instance of your model, and also a block. It's going to pass to that block an object that's called a form builder. And that form builder is going to have a bunch of methods in it, right? It knows about the general structure of your object because it can meta program this instance, and it gives you access to a bunch of f dot methods that'll generate some stuff for you, right? So we can go ahead and say f dot label. Well, let's put this in a paragraph. We can go ahead and say f.label. This is going to be the book's title. We can go ahead and say f.text field. And this is going to be a text field for the title attribute. So there's a subtle thing going on here, right? This title is like just the text that we want to show for the user. And this title should match the column that you're trying to set. But in this case, they're both title. So there we'll go. And then we'll have another paragraph in there. And this will set f.submit. So we haven't set the book instance. So here, we're just going to set this to a new book, and that should be totally fine. So here we go, okay? We have a form. We didn't write any real HTML, but if we view the page source, we can see all of the magic stuff that Rails has kind of put in here for us, right? Notice they added this hidden input with something called an authenticity token. This is just to make sure that the client is what it expects it to be, right? It's just some like security stuff that doesn't really matter, but it's in there for you. The big deal here is that it's going to set this name attribute, right? So this name attribute is something that was touched on a little bit in the Sinatra lessons, but it's easy to forget about now that you're not writing HTML. Now that you're not writing a lot of HTML by hand. But the important thing to remember is that the name attribute for an input is what determines the structure of the params hash, okay? So in this case, we're saying that the params hash should end up with a book key, and that book key should point to a hash. That hash should have a title key, and the title key will point to the value inside of this text box. That's what we're reading here. So we don't have to know how to write that anymore, but we do need to know that the params hash is gonna end up looking that way. So just to show you what I mean, right? Let's go ahead and just create a bybug here. And okay, so we just have a bybug here. Go here, we'll say we want to create a new book. So we go in here. Here we are. So we're inside here, and if we take a look at the params hash, we can see that it's a bunch of gobbledygook, but that gobbledygook includes a param book key, right? And that param book key has a title, right? So a lot of Sinatra projects that I see would have just said, right, params title. But that only worked because of the way you guys were manually setting up the name attribute on the input tags. Here you're going to have to go through that book thing. Now, Rails has also introduced this concept of strong params, which means that keys have to be allowed for your controller to use them, right? So we specify that a particular outer key is required, right? So if we say we're requiring this tag book, notice that that's returning another object that looks a lot more like just the hash that we want. But then we still need to say that within that book, right, book is going to refer to a hash, an inner hash, and that inner hash is allowed, right, it's permitted to have the key title. So once we do that, notice we get the same hash, but now permitted is equal to true, right? So this is adding an extra layer of security, and the kind of way that we're normally using this is we'll set a private method called book params that describes the structure of our hash. So we'll say params require book.permit title. So the important thing to remember here is that if I kind of put another tag in there, if I were to add another input with a different name and I don't add it to this permitted keys list, then that input is going to be ignored. So that's something to keep in mind if you notice that. Yeah.
I'm probably jumping a little bit, but once you get to using what's called form fields or the thing we were talking about this morning, then I would need to, in the permit, not just put the name of the key, but instead put in all the keys inside of my sub hash. Is that it?
Yes, exactly. And that's the next thing that we're about to get to. So let's get to that, right? So we have this method that returns the hash. We can use that to just say, create a new book using those params. And then you always want to be in the habit of checking to make sure that the save actually works, because that way when you start adding validations, right, you don't have to refactor anything. So if it does work, then that's awesome. We'll go ahead and redirect to, I guess, that book's show page. Okay. But if it doesn't work, that means the user entered some invalid data. So we'll just go ahead and render that new view again. Okay.
I'm forgetting my various lessons, but with the render new, will that retain the app book or no?
Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I'm a little shaky on that. It's on my list to go back and review the documentation for it. There definitely is a way to retain the app book, but you might have to set another option in there.
Well, we have it, right? So we could just.
Yeah.
You just work. I'm not sure.
Yeah. We'll come back to that in a sec. Okay. It auto formatted my unless clause, but now it doesn't like how long my line is. Okay. Okay.
I think I turned that one off in RuboCop, by the way, because there's a lot of cases where it actually makes it more confusing than helpful.
Yes. That is true. Like in this case, actually, I think it might have been breaking something. Okay. So let's cancel. Let's go back to new. Create another book for Ovid. Bring us back here. Starting. Okay, post book in create parameters authenticity.
Did it not
Completed
work?
did okay. It did not work. If redirect to book path else. Okay. Let's go back in here. Whoa. Okay, and then at book valid. Oh, you know what? It's not valid because the belongs to relationship implies that an author has to be there. Okay, so we're going to do this kind of hacky for now. We'll just say book.author is always going to equal that first author. Why do it that way, though, Jake, when you can just do it that way? Okay, awesome. So let's go ahead and create. Oh my, okay. So it's still not working. Bye bug, man, okay. Let's go there, we'll hit the bye bug. Take a look at what book equals. Book.valid. Now its valid is false. Oh, because we don't have an author ID 1.
It's smart that it caught that.
Sorry?
That it's smart that it caught that.
It is smart that it caught that.
Such good computers.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So let's go back here, go back to the new thing, say, create this book, bam. Okay, awesome. So that worked. Boom, boom, boom. Good. Yes, awesome, cool. So we've got our CRUD actions, but we want to kind of think about the steps that this took, right? So if we kind of pause for a second, let's think about what happened. The view sent that params hash we were just looking at, and that params hash gets sent straight to book.new. Okay, so book.new, we're not specifying it here, right? It's just an active record method. But if you can kind of think back to when you were creating your own custom dynamic ORMs, you can imagine that what it's doing, it's getting some kind of hash given to it with some kind of information in it. It's looping over the keys in that hash, and it's saying, hey, do you have a setter for that? Do you have a setter for that particular method, right? Is that method there, right? It's then going to pass the value to whatever that method is, right? So there's going to be something like arguments title, right? Now, there's not much like fancier than that going on. So if we kind of pause for a second, let's pull up our Rail console to better experiment. Okay, so if I want to create a new book, right, and I want to kind of just use a key, some key, right, and I want to give that key just some old value, I'm going to get this error, this unknown attribute error. But what that really means is just that Active Record wasn't able to find a setter that matched that key, right? It doesn't have to be a column. Really, there just has to be a setter there. So if I were to go in here and define some key equals, then that's going to be enough, right? If we now reload and then run that again, no error. And it didn't set any of the columns, right? It just passed that in there. And we can kind of prove that to ourselves by doing a puts equals, right? We can see that we get that log message printed to the screen, right? And that's true even if we were to like create a hash with some data in it, right? Right? I can create some hash, and then I can create new and pass it that hash, and it's going to still just call some key while setting that title, right? So there doesn't have to be a lot of magic going on here, right? So you can kind of imagine that if we wanted to somehow like set the author's name, right? We could say maybe have like an author name equals name. And for now, we'll just say, we'll just print that to standard out. Okay. So we want to kind of call this setter, right? We want to go back to that controller, right? What? Okay, we want to say like, you know, this book should have a real author, and I should be able to just pass the author's name, right? I shouldn't have to know that author's ID. In order to do that, I really want book params to just kind of have an author ID name in it, right? And if we think back to our way that we can manipulate the params hash, right? We can remember that all we really want is just an input with a name attribute that'll add that to the names hash, right? So let's think, just kind of experimenting, we might say something like, well, let's do this manually, right? We could create an input. Its type is going to be text, and its name is going to be book author name, okay? So if we do that and come back here and refresh, now we have this additional input. We can go back to new, and let's put our bybug back. So now here's our input, right? We'll say title, we'll say name, we'll create our book, and back at the server, we can take a look at what our params is, right? So now if we take a peek at params book, we can see that author name is now in there, okay? We still have this problem though, because if we call book params, we get this unpermitted parameter, right? Author name. This is happening because we've also got to add it to the list of permitted keys, right? But once we do that, we can kind of see that it runs okay. And somewhere in here, we should see well, okay, let's just hit that again. Okay, so now if we see book params, right, we can see that author name is there. And if we do book.new and pass that book params, we can see written by name, right? We can see that our setter got called. So we can kind of use this to do some arbitrary creation of author stuff, right? So let's see, how do we want to implement this method? Let's say we want to go back to the book model. We want to set the author name. Really by that, we want to say something like self.author equals author find or create by name is equal to name. Okay, so author name is equal to name. If we do that, go back to our new form, we should be able to do some fancier stuff with our form. Okay, cool. So now we've got that there, and we should, let's create a new one, right? We should be able to say like, okay, there was also the Iliad written by Homer. Let's create that book. We still hit our by bug. Let's go ahead and continue. Go back to the controller. Take out that by bug. So if we take a look at author.all, we should now see somewhere in there we've got Homer, right, that we just created. And that worked out totally fine. On the flip side, we should be able to say, use a name that's already in our database. It's still being set to Virgil, but notice that Ovid did not get recreated, right? We should probably take out this line. So we now kind of have a mechanism to define a relationship, right? To create two different things at a time, right? But we want Rails to be able to make this easier for us, right? The way Rails is going to do that is with a form builder method called fields for, right? So if we go ahead and do this f.fields for, this is then going to take the getter, or the name of the getter that you would use to call this association. So we would call it book.author. So we're passing author in as a symbol. And that's also going to take a book, and it's going to take it's going to pass in a form builder object again. So go ahead and do that. fields name. So we want it to contain, gosh.
Why fields for and not form for?
Because it's a sub form, right? We need it, if we did form for, it would create
we're
a new.
inside, okay.
Yeah, that's the key difference here. But apart from that, it should work pretty much the same way. But just to find out, let's go to new. We have this author name thing, and if we refresh, notice that it did not create a new form tag. That's the difference. But it automatically gave this kind of a name, right? This book author name thing. So let's go ahead and take a peek at how that looks in our params hash. So now if we go here and say by bug, go back to our server. What do we want? So we come over here. Let's take a look at our params. So we've got book, right? That's working out. Book is containing author, and author is containing the name, right? So now here's kind of the key thing. We need to make sure we don't want to fight the stuff that Rails generated for us, right? So Rails is asking us to use this kind of a structure, right? So we want to be able to just use that kind of a structure. So when I call book params, right now, notice it's ignoring the author column, right? Because right now we're only allowing author ID. If we say we allow it to be an author, right? What's going to happen, chum, is that it's going to think that author is just like referring to a string or something, right? If author is referring to a hash, then it needs to also take an array of keys in the subhash, right? So we'll say that the author hash is allowed to have a name key. Let's go ahead and continue. It's saying unpermitted author. That's what we expect. So if we submit that again, we're back here. And if we call book params, if we call book params, notice that now we have this author attribute and that's got names, right? So, chum. Okay, so here we're going to then have to modify this to make sure that author gets called instead of author name equals, right? So I'm noticing that there's going to be a problem here, right? So because if we just say author equals, that's going to be overriding active records author equals method that we already have. So let's go ahead and quickly check the documentation and see this Rails fields for form builder and see if there's some other option we need to specify the name that this is all going to have. So, oh, okay. So they want us to add person dot permission. That's for address. Okay. Boom.
I think he's tracking down Bear's outline.
Okay. Whoop. Okay. If we go back to the new page for a second, let's do a little bit of experimenting. Let's change this to at book.author. Oh, cancel. Okay, and if we check out that page source, still just author name. Choo-choo-doo. Fields for record name, record object options. There's got to be a way to set. Doobie-doo, 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 doobie-doo. Okay. Wonder if we just say author attributes.
You have a random R after attributes.
Snap. Oh. But it's still not changing the name. That's interesting. So, oh, I also don't have an R after author. Rock and roll. Oh, that disappeared. Ooh, not there at all. Interesting. What a wild problem. That's 4. Fields 4. Huh. Okay. This is pretty wild. Is there another typo that one of you guys has noticed? No. Well. Wow, that's wild. When it's there, we get a Fields 4. When it's not, we don't. That's bizarre. Okay.
Can you show us the form one more time?
The form?
Yeah.
Fields 4 author.
There should be no way that FF is messing you up, right?
No, yeah, that should be fine. Person form projects.
Isn't it fields for authors? No, I'm thinking about the other.
Yeah, because it's a one-to-many.
Yeah.
Address attributes equals form address. Address text field.
Did we do the? This can be unrelated, but did you do the accept nested attributes thing?
No, I didn't. Let's give that a try and see if that works. But
It would be a strange way to make it misbehave, but
yeah. Wow. there's nothing in our log. That's bizarre. Well,
Restart the server just for the hell of it, 'cause sometimes that.
sure.
I feel dumb when I try that, but it works like every third time.
Nope. Still there. Okay, this is pretty bizarre. It yields a field form builder object. Oh, you know what it is? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. There it is. That's the magic.
The bad part is that like no part of any errors pointed at that. You just have to eventually remember it.
Yeah. Yeah. Eventually remember that the magic isn't really magic. Okay.
Yeah.
So what this lets us do now is we've kind of made sure that the name that this is going to give is going to be, where were we even at before we started doing all this? Okay, we're trying to hit a buy bug. That's where we're trying to get. Let's go back to our server. Okay. Go. And here we are. So, books params.
Book param singular.
Book params. Okay, so unpermitted author attributes. Okay.
Yeah, that's how it was done in the lab, but I did
Yeah.
not. It was not explained anywhere.
So here, right, book params, right, we got this thing, author attributes, but we haven't permitted it. So I make sure to permit it.
We also haven't created it, is what I mean. Like that underscore attributes is some sort of defaulting. Yes.
Yes. So that's coming from the fact that the fields for did this. It created the book name, the input name as book author attributes name. That's where that structure is coming from. Let's do it again. Ooh. So now we get the params and it's working, right? So when one of your keys refers to an inner hash, that key in your permit clause needs to be an array of the keys that are allowed within the inner hash. So if author attributes had a second attribute, that attribute would not be allowed, right? Because we're saying author attributes only allow the name subkey. Okay. So that means we are good to go. Okay, so can we finally add this? Oh, I'm still in the backlog. Okay, good. Wait, no. Okay, so here we are in the thing. Okay.
Model? Isn't it book.rb?
Yes, it is. Cool. Okay, so here we are here. We're setting it to this author, find by name. Can't cast active support.
I feel like I would try that again because that error was thrown while your server was in a weird state.
So what's going on here is before I was assuming I was going to pass a string in. Now we're passing in a hash-like thing of attributes.
Okay.
Okay. So send it again. Bam. Rock and roll. Okay. That was a long way to get here. We've avoided duplicates, all of that magic. The final note is that if you have this relationship in here, you can use this accepts nested attributes for thing to define this setter in here for you, which can be awesome depending on how complex the logic is. Definitely, it's worth looking at the documentation for that, but you also definitely want to check the documentation to make sure you know how to handle that kind of thing. Cool. Okay, so we finally made it full swing here. The real takeaways, right? There's a lot of like mechanics here that's easy to get caught up trying to memorize, but the real important takeaways are: do you understand where the params hash gets its structure, right? That process isn't just straight up magic to you, that you could look at the page source and understand what the structure is going to be. Then, do you understand how that params hash translates into mass assignment for an active record model, right? And understand the fact that that's also not magic, that you can make any collection of arbitrary setters you want, right? And because of that, if you nest forms together, right, if you have these kinds of nested params attributes, you can use that to just invoke arbitrary setters in your data layer, right? So you can kind of imagine, you know, any number of nesting things that we wanted to do, right? Or any number of actions we might want the data layer to accomplish by those, right? That's the kind of key takeaway here. This next week gets pretty complex and can be really challenging. But I think the biggest challenge comes from the fact that you've got to stop seeing it all as magic and start kind of thinking and being aware of what's going on under the hood. Cool. How are you guys feeling about that?
Seems good.
Nice. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support us on Patreon.